Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wheel of Time recap podcast here at We Know Scripted TV. I am your host, Taran Armstrong, here to talk about the Wheel of Time on Amazon Prime, season 3. Very excited to be covering this season week to week, episode by episode, or in this case, 3 episodes by episode. And with me in this journey across the landscape over to the wastes of the Aiel is Grace. How you doing, Grace?
I'm doing well, Taran. We're almost halfway through the season.
I know.
There are neither beginnings or endings to Turning of the Wheel of Time, but we're definitely in the middle of a turning of the Wheel of Time. So
it's very much like it gives and it takes, the fact that it's 3 episodes of a drop immediately, because on one hand I just wanted to keep watching all of the episodes. On the other hand, it's now, as you said, almost halfway over already.
Yeah, next week we'll be halfway through the episodes. So yep.
But we are here. We're going to talk about the first 3 episodes. That is what we were talking about here. So if you have not watched all 3 episodes and you do not want to be spoiled, you can go back over and finish watching those episodes, all 3 of these first 3 episodes, and then you can come back and we will be talking about it with this very cool background we got going on. I thought it was very cool. We will not be spoiling things from the books. We will just be talking about the episodes. And then at the end of the podcast, we will open up a more spoilery section where we will talk about stuff from the books. Now, just to, I think, sort of set expectations and sort of introduce our own journeys in the world of the Wheel of Time, I have read all of the books. I have, in fact, read all of the books many times, except for like the last couple, which I only read once. That is primarily because I read them as a kid. I think I probably started I was probably like in middle school. It was probably like 2000, 2001 era. And so it's been a big part of my life for a long time. The Wheel of Time was one of my big introductions to the world of fantasy, certainly epic fantasy in general. All of that said, I have a terrible memory for what happened to me. Despite the reason I read them so many times is because I consistently forgot all of the things that were happening. And so while I do have, I think, a decent grasp on generally what happens and where things go, please forgive me if I forget a name here or there, or if I don't remember like a specific detail of like how the magic system works, or something along those lines. But that is where I come from. But again, we will not be talking about book perspective. And I would say this. I would say I'll toot my own horn of Villiers here, that I think we're pretty good at being very TV focused, even when we have knowledge from the book. So that is our focus here on this podcast for the first portion of it, at least, and then we'll get into book stuff afterward. Grace, what is your journey through the Wheel of Time?
I have read the first 6 books in the Wheel of Time. So, and to put people, if you're like not a book reader, this season is the 3rd season, but is adapting mostly, with like big caveats and asterisks, the 4th book. So season 1 was the first book, kind of, yeah, basically. Season 2 was kind of like 2 and 3, and then we're kind of like doing book 4 again with like
very
major.
It's very messy now.
with very big like caveats of things.
I would say there are probably sections up through like 5 and maybe even 6. Right. I don't remember where the books things happen at all times, but yeah.
And then, yeah, so I've read through book 6. I plan to keep bringing the thing I will say about the books of Wheel of Time. I really love them. I think that they like are so well written in the way that they begin and then eventually like end up in a place where you're like, this is some of the most epic stuff I've ever read in my whole life. Every time I start again, I'm like, okay, all right, it's a little bit of work to start getting into it. So I feel like I stall out when I need to start a new book, as opposed to the end where I'm like reading like 7 chapters at a time or whatever. But I continue to keep, will continue to keep reading it, but I have not watched the whole thing. And then actually in terms of like where I feel like some of my gaps end up being, I was just saying this to you before we started, Taran, that like a book as expansive, a world as expansive as this means it's basically like impossible for me to be able to Google things. So I can't just like Google the answer to a question because I'm worried it will spoil a thing from like 5 books in the future, or like when
Mhm.
or if a character dies. So that's where I feel like sometimes I'm like, I would love to be doing more research, but I like kind of can't. But I will say, watching these first 3 episodes, I felt pretty locked in. I watched them through twice now. I feel pretty locked in to the show and what the show is doing, and actually quite enjoyed it. And just before we dive into our recap of the first 3 episodes, just remind folks to subscribe to We Know Scripted TV. You can do it in the podcast feed. I believe there's also a We Know Wheel of Time podcast feed, which is a previous PSR feed that we've rebranded. So you might already be subscribed, so check for that. We're also on YouTube, We Know Scripted TV there as well. And all the links for everything we're doing, WeKnowScriptedTV.com, in case you need
Mm.
those links.
Yes.
Ratings and reviews help, and tell a friend as well.
I think another thing to set up here is that this show has like an interesting reputation in terms of audience reaction. The first season, I think, was met with mixed reviews at first, and then fairly consistently negative reviews by the end of the season. People really did not like the finale. However, I actually really did enjoy the first season. And while I will agree with many of the criticisms of the finale and the way that it was handled, I actually still liked some of the decisions they made in the finale, and I thought it worked in some ways better than the end of the first book, which I always felt was a little clunky. And then I thought season 2 was an improvement on season 1. Although, again, I think the finale felt a little clunky. In particular, I take issue with, and this is actually similar to my feelings on a lot of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon things, like their big set pieces kind of lose me because they don't always make a lot of logical sense, and it feels like things are just kind of happening. And I think the Wheel of Time has really suffered with that. I would say I'm generally a bit higher on this show than the general consensus, but there is definitely still a decent amount of dedicated fans that do really like the show. It has continued to be renewed, and it does generally have some very good ratings. I think what's often talked about is that a lot of book readers don't like the show because of how severely it deviates from book material. That is not an issue for me really in any way. I'm a big fan of watching adaptations and seeing the decisions that are made and getting to like make my own interpretation of how I might have made changes. I'm not somebody that watches a show most of the time looking for a one-to-one recreation of what I read in the books. In fact, sometimes when things change, I'm like excited because I'm like, oh, that's a really cool way of thinking about this or doing this or changing this character or whatever. And that's not 100%, but that's generally where I come from. So if you're somebody that like really hates the changes that are made, you might be frustrated with my opinions because I'm not like necessarily on the same page generally.
Turn,
How do you feel?
I don't need it to be exactly like it was in the books. I need it to be exactly like how I wanted it to be and how I wanted it to look from the books. No, I'm just kidding. That's not what I want at all. I just fully agree with that. I actually, the thing for me that I've actually, this Wheel of Time is the thing. I tried to start the books knowing that the show was coming and that people who I love that their opinions about television were excited about the Wheel of Time because they love the book. So I was like, I went into the books. I am such a visual person that one of the things I can sometimes struggle with when I am reading a book is not being able to visualize it well. And sometimes actually watching the adaptation or a thing about that will then start to help me then go back and get kind of grounded in a way. It's just the way my brain works. And so this is what happened to me with Wheel of Time. So I started the Wheel of Time, was not finding myself getting into it, started the show, then went back and read sort of like ahead. And I think I was caught up even with season 2. I had read the book, but obviously again, it's messy in terms of one-to-ones. But I read a lot of the books by the time I was watching season 2. It slowed down a little bit in terms of reading, but that's sort of, so my attachment almost like I do have quite an attachment to the show, and I do like the show quite a bit. One of the things I think I heard a lot about season 1 was the initial reaction was kind of tepid. When people went back to it as they were preparing for season 2, they're like, actually, it might even actually be better than we thought. Not that it was perfect, but that it was maybe like we were being a little too harsh on it. So I like it. I really like the first 3 episodes of this new season as well. So I'm excited to chat with you about it, Taran, and for people to join us along the way.
Yes. All right. Well, let's get into it then. So season 3 opens with another big set piece, another big battle. This time at the White Tower, and this is because at the end of the previous season, Varen discovers that that Leandrin is in fact, and this is of course like there's plenty of other evidence to point to this fact that Leandrin is of the Black Aja, a dark friend, Aes Sedai, and there is a confrontation that happens, and it turns out she's got a bunch of friends at the tower, and so there's a big battle that happens, and I have a couple of thoughts about this. One, I think it's perhaps the best set piece they've done since the first episode. I thought the Trolloc attack at the Two Rivers was very good. Two, I was still a little bit concerned at times. There was some clunkiness here. I would say, in particular, Grace, there's a moment in the throne room. I don't remember what the room is called. The Amerlin seat.
Yeah.
The Amerlin seat room, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody gets cut in half.
And
the CG on that person was worse than Daredevil's pilot. Or episode 1.
I don't know. What's up, Amazon? You have so much money. Just make it look good.
The weaves, though, I think are looking better than ever. Different colors, different like ways of interpreting the different kinds of things. I thought that was great.
I think it maybe is my favorite like looking magic. Like I'd have to like really scour, and remember what's there. But I think it looks really, really good. I also agree. I love this opening action sequence, this battle. The Black Aja kind of like outing themselves and turn in, but they kind of get chased off. There's a critique I've seen a little bit is that like things seem to be a little bit like too like, well, back to normal. At the White Tower, but I think it's kind of okay with me. It's just some of the stuff I like the most in the show is this. I mean, the world building is just so strong, but this, the sort of infighting of the White Tower, being this institution that stood for a long time and is suddenly starting to crack under the pressure of everything that's going on in the world, I think is quite good, and I thought it looked quite good as well for the most part.
Yeah, I think that one thing I feel like I would have liked for this first episode is a better sense of the passing of time. Because there's like an offhand comment about like, oh man, I've been cooped up on a ship for a month by I think Matt. And I also get the sense that like after the Black Aja attack, there was more time that passed as well, that like they were getting back to normal and also trying to cover it up because this would be very bad if people found out. And so to me, that was one of the things I felt was missing from this episode was that like I would have loved to, for as much as like the cold open on the Black Aja attack was like, oh, that's interesting, that's fun, whatever. Whether there's like a passing of time after that or before that, getting to see like a montage of these people on the ship and like the different relationships that are developing, like Rand and Elaine seem to have like a rapport after the finale of season 2. Like even just a montage of that developing would have been nice. Elaine and Avienda have quite the rapport. A little bit more build up to that would have been nice, I think. And so like I think that is one of the things I would have liked to see more of, and I think that also helps alleviate some of this sense also that like here's this big battle and now we're immediately back to normal, as you said.
I agree. There's a line for me. It's when one of my favorite scenes of the episode is actually when like Moraine kind of like summons everybody. It's like the whole cast is in this one room. It was kind of like extremely fun. Where she sort of tells them all like, you can do whatever you want, but also we're gonna go to Tear. We got to go at dawn. And Loyal's being like, can we leave after a nice breakfast? It's so good. But I was a little confused because she's talking about like if word has spread to spread here, that it's spread to the White Tower or something. And I'm like, wait, like, and so, yeah, because we're not where we were at the end of last season. We're in a different city. And so that, to me, I totally agree. I feel like, say what you will about like title cards or exposition, but like Star Wars has used them fairly effectively. I mean, not that I need the scrawling thing, but I maybe would want a little bit of it. I also get the idea that like the more you start to do that, the more scrutiny I think there is on then, because some of the other stuff that I think some people I've seen talking about from this episode is the like, how did those people get to there as quickly as those people got to there? And I feel like so much of the books, kind of like Lord of the Rings as well, where it's like so much of the books is like about the actual journey and traveling. And sometimes you're like, this is a Game of Thrones problem too, where very early on it was like so much of the story was like, now I'm gonna, we have to walk the whole King's Road. By like season 7, we're like, I'm not worried about spending time on the King's Road, so we're just gonna like fast forward this person getting from here to there, and so I don't know. I guess they don't want the scrutiny of people being able to be like, yeah, that actually doesn't, your title card actually doesn't make sense. But I feel like I would personally quite like a little bit more like, this is where we are. This is how much time there has been. Not the biggest complaint I have. I think the character stuff is working well enough.
Mhm.
But I would agree with you that that is a thing. I think that, especially a show that has this much going on, to then being to sit and be like, wait, is this happening here and when and whatever, is a little much, I think. But
Yeah, and I think that for me, the first episode was very good, but the weakest of the three. And I think that it was largely because there was just so much to do. And so, adding more like time to show the passing of time certainly
I
adds
get it.
more bulk to the episode. But I also think it gives it a little more room to breathe because this episode just felt such breakneck in terms of pacing, and not in like I think the best way where it's like, oh, it's thrilling breakneck pacing. It was like jumping from place to place to place. There's so many threads we need to start weaving and like pulling in different directions. It felt very much like a setup episode for the rest of the season to then go off and start the actual storylines. More so like a necessary episode than like one where there's room to breathe and really tell the story in the way that they want. Um, I've talked about this before, but I think the biggest weakness of the show generally has been just how condensed it is forced to be. 8 episode seasons is wild for the Wheel of Time, which is a massive, massive series.
Yeah.
And there is, as we discover watching the show, plenty that you can cut out, but like it's still it's sort of like the example of like an epic fantasy series. And so when The Pit has a 15 episode season and Wheel of Time is at 8 episodes, it's like, what are we doing here? Like, come on.
Yeah, what is it an 8 episode, or an 8 season arc that I believe we've been sort of like told or hinted at, that like
I
that's
think
sort of
so.
the timeline
So
of
already you're
how.
cutting like the amount of books basically in half.
Mhm.
And then you're telling the each season is then a fairly short amount of episodes to tell each book. So they're already, as we said, in season 3, cutting through big swaths of like 3, 4, 5, and might even be touching 6. Like who knows?
So I think it's probably fair to say episode 1 is the weakest. I still thought it was pretty good. I think in
I
terms
agree.
of the way in which we sort of have everyone together, and then I think set pretty clear agenda items for them
Yep.
all to sort of do and to go off. And this was a thing. I got to speak with a bunch of the cast early on, and one of the things is, I think that one of the things that's so compelling, I think the relationships and the dynamics between a lot of these characters is really interesting. And I actually spoke to them about the fact that then they go off and they're all in these separate storylines. And when they were speaking about it, they were saying like, it's actually not just that we're in different stories. We're actually often filming in literally different countries, and you're on a show with somebody, but you actually, and someone you're supposed to have a romantic, relationship with on the show, you actually might not see them for the entire time you're filming. Actually, I shared with this you before we started that Sophie Okendo, who plays Swan, on the day of the press junket, had gone downstairs. It was the first time she had seen Rosamund Pike in literally a year, and like bawled her eyes out and cried. It was like, oh, it's so good to see you. And like that, I think exemplifies sort of what exactly this. But I feel
The last
like,
time I saw you, you saved me from rubble.
right, that's right. But I quite liked the way in which we sort of I feel like even before we get to sort of the end of episode 1, the like mirror ran. Not that's the most D&D coded stuff I've seen. Where like all the different like the magic cards and the great like there's so
Mhm.
much stuff happening. We actually get like 2 battle scenes, like 2 action scenes within 1 episode in the first one. Even before that happened, sort of starting to set people off as to where they're going to go, while also delivering, I thought, pretty good character stuff for again the limited time we have. I really love the like the Two Rivers boys hanging out, bro, literally defying Moraine's order to not tell anybody about the dragon or the horn, and Matt is literally getting his picture taken, drawn. I think there's a lot in this first episode that actually is like, I think it's kind of necessary, and so it's sort of held back from being the best episode because it has so much to do. But I think it does all the things it's trying to do particularly well.
Yes, I mean it does everything it needs to do for sure, and I think that like like I said, it was sort of like a functional episode more so than like an episode where they really get to dig in deep on things. They still have the big action set piece to start it. And they still have some good moments. There are some interesting sort of like choices and decisions for like where to place people, and I think like in particular we are looking at how the group splits up is sort of like what the bulk of the episode is about,
Mhm.
because they're all together and it's like we should stick to like it's an epic fantasy with different viewpoint characters. You don't often get them all together in the same place.
Yeah, 100%.
And so you need to split them up, but you need to do so in a way that doesn't feel cheap, I think,
I agree.
is a huge thing. And did they fully accomplish that? I'm not sure. I think that like with Matt and Nynaeve, I think it made a lot of sense. They really set up Matt with the storyline of him occasionally breaching into the old tongue, and he's like hearing voices and memories are invading his brain. And Nynaeve is a healer, and she wants to help him, and so she needs to stay, and he needs to stay. That makes sense.
Mhm.
Elaine has her own duties and things that she needs to be doing. That makes sense. With Perrin, I feel like they could have set Perrin up a little more in terms of like, Rand wants to go home. Perrin also just wants to go home.
Yeah.
And so you get that. You get that like Perrin is essentially doing what Rand wishes that he could do. But I think there's a world where you're a viewer like, really, Perrin, like you're just gonna go home. Um,
That's true. That's fair. I feel like he's a character I feel like has been I really like his book stuff. I sort of love it stuff. And I do feel like he's sort of like probably in the show world the least and I think people would argue that
I
maybe
mean,
he's
yeah.
like the least interesting book character, but I think he's the least interesting show like main character, I think. But what can you do? He's gonna go home.
I
I
mean,
liked
yeah,
when we got there, but
exactly. Well, to be fair, I think to the show, it's pretty accurate to the books that he just
yeah.
kind of wants to go home and
Yeah,
goes home.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Yeah.
And I love this sort of thing because again, I think this was set up really well. Of like, can you control Rand? Not only in the sense of like he might go mad with the one power, but also just in general, can you like guide him in the direction that you want? And we have this thing happening where Moraine is working with Lanfear
Love it.
to a degree to try to manipulate Rand into the direction that they both agree that he should go, which is to Tyr, to take Kalendor, the sword. Yes, there is a sword and a stone that only Rand can pull because he is the
I
destined one.
the prophecies in this show where they're all like that's what you got to go do, and they're like, prophecies don't really get them, but you got to do
and
them.
and yes, they eventually go to a desert where there is a people that is native there that have their own strange culture,
What
and he is their destined prophesized leader. Like,
I do like that too. So when I talked with Rosamund, I talked to a lot, and I talked with Rosamund and Yasha. They were sort of together in the interviews, and I talked about the fact that I feel like more than ever, and this has sort of been the same, like it's been a similar story for Moraine the whole time, but it's a little bit of like she both has like it's a very like mentor-mentee relationship kind of, except she like, he's like she's like the mother of a teenage son who like desperately wants to be independent and think he's doing his own things. And she's trying to figure out how to like, basically, because the chance are it's half as likely that he goes, he destroys the world as much as he saves it. So she's trying to like, hopefully he saves the world. Actually, the one thing I will note about Rosamund Pike is that she executive produced the show. We talked about this in the preview. She's also narrating the books. She gets the books and the show, I think. And I know that people can quibble about the choices that they've had to make, but in terms of her being an executive producer on the show, I feel like she was so tuned in to the show when I was, and like the themes of the show, when I was interviewing her. But if that's to me what it feels like. And then you have this new dynamic with Lanfear, and almost the way in which, even the way that Lanfear, suggests like, if these other just pesky kids weren't in the way, like we could do whatever we want with Rand. And Rand's like, as if you think I would like, do anything to these other kids. And Lanfear's like, oh no, you will. Like, I know that you will, because you know how important this is. I really liked this, I think they're actually just like both perfectly cast for their individual characters as well. So
I love this little alliance, and I'm really enjoying Lanfear. I mean, she was a highlight of season 2, and I think she continues to be an absolute highlight for season 3 so far. One thing, if you listen to the audiobooks in particular, that before Rosamund Pike started narrating them, a thing would happen at the end of like every single audiobook, which is that they would play an interview with Robert Jordan, where he would talk about how like part of the initial idea for the story was to take all of these like fantasy tropes, right, and put a little bit of a spin like on them. And so, yes, like the first book really resembles like Lord of the Rings, and there are other parts that resemble like King Arthur, Dune, like various things. But he always wanted to put a little bit of a spin to them. And so one of the main things was like, what happens when the prophesized farm boy who is supposed to like essentially save the world doesn't want to?
This is good.
Like,
yeah.
Just wants to go home and live a normal life. And I think like nowadays that doesn't seem very revolutionary.
100%.
But like at the time with like sword and sorcery fantasy, like that was really like, this like was trailblazing a new kind of prophesized hero. And I say new kind, but we are talking about Dune, which is also its own sort of thing. But so it was very cool to see a moment of Rand just being like, I just want to go home, man.
Imagine like showing up on Tatooine and be like, Luke, you gotta kind of, he's like, nah.
Right. So good stuff. And I love this direction for Moraine. I love the idea of Moraine and Lanfear being sort of two sides of the same coin. Because Moraine, I think, is somebody that you can keep digging deeper and deeper into like the harder side of her, and Lanfear, we are kind of digging deeper and deeper into the perhaps softer side of her. Or is that a manipulation? We don't know. So very fun stuff from both of those characters, and the fact that they sort of team up together to scare everyone off, essentially. Very fun. I love that kind of. This is one of my favorite things in like fiction, is the manipulative good character. The character that like has manipulative machinations, but for good. I think that's very fun and underutilized.
Can I ask you? So the other pairing that I got was Rafe and Natasha O'Keefe, who plays Lanfear. And I maybe said this mostly because Rafe was sitting next to Natasha, and I said I think Lanfear would make the best survivor player of any character on the show. I actually don't know if that's true. I actually think it could be Moraine. Do you have a thought on this? Who the best Wheel of Time survivor character? Like, who would be the best survivor player out of all of these people? I do feel like Moraine has a really good shot, but she might be like in modern day. She's too head of the snake,
She's I think her social game needs some work.
That's true.
I think she's very good at
problem.
That is the problem. I think she's very good at like the strategic stuff, but I think that like she spends so much time sort of like on her own doing her own thing and like pissing people off. But whereas Lanfear like can really we'll talk about Gabriel. I feel like Gabriel right now is
that's a good point.
High promise for literally just compulsion. everyone.
Fair. Yeah.
Actually, I'm already the winner of this game.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Um,
Um,
that seems to be episode 1, right? Where like we have the attack on the White Tower. They know they need to go to. Moraine wants to fill the next step of the prophecy. Everyone's gonna to go off and do their own things. We have like people going to the 2 rivers. We have Matt and Nynaeve staying behind. Egwene's gonna do her test to then be able to like, and then be immediately like, well, now I get to leave. I'm gonna go actually with Rand. Rand's like, surprise, we're not going to Tear. We're going to the Aiel Waste. That's basically
yes, and I again, I like how this was set up again because it's all sort of fits in with the theme and also with the way that they plotted this in a way where his decision ultimately, the second he makes it, it makes sense. He has this conversation with Elaine. They set up his relationship with Avienda as a little bit contentious, and this idea that like you need to like find a way to make this work with the Aiel, and then that combined with this idea of like, is he somebody that we can control? It all ties into Egwene's test, going through the arches, seeing a version of Rand that could be, and then ultimately, even when once they think they have successfully manipulated Rand into doing what they want, he decides to go in a different direction, but one that does feel like it makes sense. So I thought all of that was really well threaded and put together. So again, it's just like I think that they had to do their best with the very condensed time frame, but I do think they did a really good job with it, and it's sort of like I think, I hope, makes you sort of excited to see like, okay, we're going in this new direction, and that was fun.
Basically, the reason when they say the thing about Rosamund being tapped into the show, the thing that I've heard her talk about, and then I asked her about this in the interview, was I feel like one of the main themes of this show that I feel like is present in basically every single character that exists on the show struggles with this idea of responsibility and loneliness. And so the idea of the things you have to do instead of the things you want to do, and the way in which the things you have to do ultimately lead you to make choices that sort of like isolate you, alienate you, make you lonely. Like, this is a big, obviously, piece of Rand's journey of like the more that he has to do, the more it like pushes him away potentially from but it's even Egwene, as every character basically goes through this. I think this struggle, you can see it with I was talking with Elaine and Avienda too, and you can see the ways in which like Avienda chooses to leave because she's like, I have to go and protect Rand, whereas Elaine says, well, I have to stay here because I need to be like the first Aes Sedai queen, and so they all are dealing with this thing of like personal responsibility and the way that leads them to isolation or loneliness, and often trying to like figure out how they can get some of that connection with other people at the cost of their duty or responsibility. I feel like that's like, to me, I feel like once you see that, you can see it so centrally throughout everything that's happening in these episodes.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually think that ties in well to Leandrin and her character, but that comes a little bit later. We also get, I think episode 1 does a good job of like resetting where the characters are and like what they experienced. And I think very vitally for me, they're not just kind of forgetting what happened to Egwene. I think that her storyline through season 2 was one of the best ones of the season, most impactful. And we are making sure that we are not just like glossing over all of the trauma that she experienced. And in fact, tying it into more plot points when eventually we learn that Lanfear is sort of like putting her thumb on the scale and making things worse for her, which then ties into her next plot, which is the her dream walking situation, which I'm sure we'll hear more about in future episodes. But just a great follow through, I think, here.
I think to that point, I think it's such a good example of the way in which they've kept all these, and again, to talk a little bit about like the way in which people sometimes feel like the show, there's too many changes. I do feel like my fundamental belief is that I kind of understand the changes and the fact that they are remaining true to most of the themes of the show and the things that really I think are resonating and the way that those are working and because of the choices they have to cut things. I do feel like that balance is really good. I think Egwene's storyline through the first 3 episodes is actually a tremendous example of the way in which like all the things they are choosing to keep feel like the most impactful and the most thematically important as well. So
Exactly. There's a lot of efficiency that needs to happen when you're condensing so much and with so many characters.
yeah.
And so, you know, that level of efficiency can often come with the downside of like bad things happen and then we just move on past them because we can't linger on them. I think what the Wheel of Time, the show has done really well so far is not not ignoring these things and
Mhm.
finding ways to tie them into other themes and storylines. A lot of people didn't like in season one when we had this whole like sort of funeral procession for the warder that died.
Mhm.
But they did still use that time to set characters and to set up something that is very relevant for many future episodes and seasons and so on and so forth that we are now seeing more examples of as another warder has died in the first episode.
Mhm.
And so, I think that that is something that they are doing really well. I think, and while some of those changes for the sake of efficiency might be upsetting for some people, it's really not particularly for me, at least not yet. So I think Egwene remains one of the best characters that they have on the show in terms of like the changes that they. But really, the same is true for so many. I really think that that Lanfear is so good. I think Moraine is a more compelling character on the show, and it's just I really like what they are doing with character in general. I think so many of the characters on the show have more depth to them than they are presented as having in the books, at least like through this point in the books here.
Yeah. You're talking about episode 2. We sort of are like in basically 3 different places between
Yeah.
the White Tower, the 2 rivers, and then the journey to the Aiel Waste. I feel like
Should
is
we
where we yeah.
should we stay with the White Tower first before we venture out? And
This opening scene in episode 2, before we get to the White Tower of
right. Well, it's
the
relevant to the White Tower plot. Yeah.
yes, is so good. This is why I mean it's brutal, but it's incredibly good. I love Olivia Williams. We just watched her on
Mhm.
Dune Prophecy. She's here as Morghese. It's this scene is brutal. It really is like okay, that's who she is. You know,
This was very Game of Thrones.
so Game of Thrones. I agree.
Very clearly Game of Thrones inspired, which some Wheel of Time fans might take issue with, but I thought it was very fun. Between like the various houses and then the brutal murders. I think it's a great way to set up Morghese as a character. Some people may disagree, but I thought it was really, really fun. And not what I was expecting. Like just like the cutting of the throats
Brutal.
was wild and really sets the tone here for both of these characters who have a lot of power, Morghese and Elida, and I'm so happy to see Elida here, especially portrayed by this particular actor who I'm very fond of.
Her voice is the best. It's amazing. It's so
Yeah.
and then obviously Gabriel's here, but I love like a lot of shows they're like something is off here. They're like, no, that's fine. Everything's fine with the White Tower. Don't worry. Like, I don't know. Feels like it's bad. Feels like it's bad. Yeah. They're onto it.
Yep.
Their spidey senses are tingling.
And I thought very funny scene when Morghese arrives and then has to wait outside for a moment before she is allowed in, and then they're introducing everyone, and this is the first like real sort of like spoilery for I guess episode 3. There's a reveal in episode 3 moment here from episode 2 that is set up, and I thought we might wait longer for that reveal. But I thought they did a very fun job. They did a good job of making this very fun as a way to reveal Gabriel as he walks in, and there's a hesitation.
Yeah.
Oh, this is Gabriel. And they then reveal in the next episode that is because he is using compulsion, which is a thing that is dropped in episode 3. I don't think we know like the specifics of it yet, but like you can kind of get
Yeah.
the idea.
Yeah.
Then basically what is happening, and this is explained in the episode, these people have never seen him before.
So good.
Never seen him before. A moment of like, who is this? he then uses compulsion on them, and they go, "Oh, it's Gabriel. I love this guy. I've known him for years." When Elaine is having drinks with him, it's like, "Oh yeah, we always just get drunk together." She's never seen this man before.
So good. It's so good. I love the whole arrival of Margase, like not just Margase, but Galad and Gawain as well. This
Mhm.
whole getting to see a little bit more of Elaine's world brought into the White Tower. It's extremely fun. And yeah, Gabriel being secretly evil Forsaken is the best. It's so fun.
Yes, I thought it very, very fun. Of course, there's a bit of a plot here where Morghese would like to take Elaine back home. Elaine does not want to go. There's a little bit of back and forth there. Ultimately, it seems as though, you know, Elaine sort of has to choose between various forms of duty, right? Like, does she have her duty to Andor? Does she have her duty to the White Tower, or a duty to herself, which is kind of what it feels like she ultimately goes with. And I think that you see the complexities of Morghese as a character as well, where, you know, you get this first impression of her as this very, very ruthless person, potentially evil, but ultimately respects her daughter's decision, and is proud of her for sort of standing up to her and making a good case for why she needs to do this. So I thought that was this was a very a good way of sort of continuing to establish Elaine and who she is, especially if, you know, because she was there in season 2, but I think we're really starting to finally develop her as her own proper character outside of her relationship to our other main characters.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of skimmed over briefly that she has a romantic interest with Avienda this
Right.
season, which is I guess when they were saying that it is definitely not, it's not in the book, but I think the what they were saying is basically like people read it. There's a way in which Robert Jordan is extremely progressive for when he wrote it, and is still of its time, where sort of explicitly queer characters are sort of few and far between in the show, and that's a decision that Rafe and the rest of the writers have made to sort of make some of it more explicit. Obviously, we have that with Moraine and Swan as well. So I like this choice again. And when I was looking at sort of their two characters, I actually think there's a lot of ways in which specifically it makes a lot of sense in terms of who they are, their personal responsibility, and then what they want in terms of them coming together. But I really like Elaine. I like the casting of I think her name is Sierra Coveney, who plays Elaine. I think she's quite good as well, and adding
She
Olivia
nails it. I
Williams is
mean,
good. Yeah.
you know, casting is obviously a contentious issue generally. But in terms of, like, you know, if your goal is to like cast a person who fits exactly what you thought was the character, I think that they've nailed it with her. I don't think that is necessarily like the goal for casting always, and nor should it be. But I think in this particular instance, it very much is, or at least they've succeeded on that front.
Agreed.
So so that's mostly the so in addition to that, part of the thing is that they are then tasked with discovering the Black Aja, rooting out any other members of the Black Aja that may still be at the tower, or just finding where Leandrin is or went. And so you know, it's essentially just like you guys are the only people that are for sure not bad.
I
Like,
like it. I like this is classic. We've played a fair bit of Blood on the Clock Tower,
mhm.
Goose Goose Duck, and I feel like it's like, all right, fine. I think There's no way you're bad, so I'm just gonna trust you with all my information. I really like this for Swan, and this is one of my favorite book stories. Is Elaine and Nynaeve on the hunt for the Black Aja. I really like this. So there's that. There's also Matt's stuff in the where he's trying to heal him. He's gonna give the horn over to Swan as well.
Great conversation with
Yeah,
Swan, where she like just lulls him into this false sense of security, and then it's
yeah,
like, yeah, as long as you live.
that's right. It's so
Uh,
good. Well, I
like,
think it works especially in relation to the fact that he blatantly ignores Moraine in episode where she's like, "Do not let anybody know. Like, don't make a scene." And they go out and they immediately make a scene. So I think in response to that, Swan, it's like she's connected with Moraine, and the fact that she's able to like make him make this decision is
you wouldn't have
really
a
great.
portrait made for
Yeah,
you. And
yeah,
I think this was intentional, that like the portrait looks very much like the cover of like book 2.
right.
Um, So, she's like, would you like for me to hold the horn for safekeeping? It's like, yes.
Very good. Glad and Gwen also doing their dual. I just appreciated that. Thank you for putting that in the show, Amazon Prime. Thank you so
Everyone's a
much.
fan of this.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Yes.
This is everyone's thing. Very good stuff leading up to this is really sort of like I think the point. Just to add a little bit of I think prior book context here. Matt as a character to this point in the books is pretty like one note to some degree.
I agree.
Doesn't really show a lot of character in general. This is the portion of the story where we're finally getting to know Matt a little better in the books. Now in the show, they've done a better job of characterizing him to this point. But like this is the moment I think a lot of book readers start to go, oh, you know, this sort of speech that Swan gives about like him reminding her her of Jesus, him reminding her of her uncle,
Yeah.
who was like a degenerate gambler kind of guy, but then died saving people going into a fire. Like keep going back and back. That is a classic line that describes Matt's character. And then he has this moment in episode 3 where he fights Egwene and Galad with his staff, and that's when people are really like, you know what, this Matt guy's kind of cool. I think in the show you probably have already felt that to some degree. I think that Matt in the show has been much more charismatic to this point, but we're still giving Matt his good content here, and I thought it was all done very well.
I think I'm also this. I think the first episode or this batch episode really got me. I think completely over the recasting. I know that's the thing that like was a little, and what can you do? They had to recast him. It's totally fine. But I'm like, I think this guy's a really good Matt. Actually, I don't have any bias about the fact that he had to come in a little bit later. So.
Yeah, especially because like now show Matt and book Matt are really lining up. Like it really is like this is exactly the guy I was imagining. And so that's been pretty cool to see.
Yeah. Where do you want to go to next? Two Rivers or the Journey to the Aiel Waste?
I feel like there's not a ton there at the Aiel Waste at the moment.
Can I just say then very quickly the last shot of like the like Egwene seeing the woman who she's been seeing in her dreams was extremely cool. My other note is, what did you make of Moraine's hat, her sun hat?
I noticed that immediately.
Love the sun hat. I think it's so
anytime she was on screen with the hat, that was all I was looking at.
This big hat. If someone on Twitter could do, the thing where I'd be like, every like this gets, I will in every 10,000 likes it gets, I will like increase this person's like, hat by. I don't know if you've ever seen this. People should do that with Moraine. Like every like it gets, will increase it by like whatever until it becomes this ginormous hat. Please, someone do that. Please.
It's like a good reminder also that like this isn't your typical medieval fantasy setting. Like this is a proper sort of like society with various fashions, and you see that with the Queen as well, of course. And they have like proper. They're not like in rags all the time. They have actual hats.
I loved it. I love her sun hat.
But yeah, so they move toward the Aiel Waste, otherwise known by the Aiel as the Threefold Land, and really most of what we're getting here is that Rand is going to be training with Lan, which is something that again book readers have really wanted to have happen in the books. This is happening a lot through season 1 when they're traveling. We didn't get much of it, so now we're getting some of that training here happening.
Best line is who is it that is like, why the hell is he practicing with a sword?
Right?
He can use magic. What the heck? It's so funny. It's my favorite. And then they explain it. They explain why he needs to, why he should, train.
And then we get this Lanfear content as well. This fantastic Lanfear moment where she is like seducing Rand and torturing Egwene simultaneously, and it's just like,
so
ooh,
good.
yeah. We just in case she's been working too well on you, just a reminder of how bad she is.
Couple of good torture scenes. At the end of episode 1, we get one from Moedine as well. Turning the man into a gray man. So,
oh yeah, that was just weird.
Yeah, I love it. I think I just said I love the torture scenes. I do, I guess. I guess I do. Sorry.
Yeah. And it's through this sort of and we're getting sort of like hints about like, hey, why is your neck bruised again? And it's happening through the dreams. We're gonna eventually get hints about this through episode 2 and 3 that like that basically these bruises seem to be coming from land fear. In dreams. Lanfear, if you don't remember from season 2, is somebody that works a lot in dreams, has a lot of power there. And so this is, as we are learning, becoming more and more important to the story. And Egwene, in an attempt to escape the torture that she's receiving in her dreams, ends up in somebody else's dream. And it's a wise one, as we quickly learn in episode 3. There's this was always like, especially in the early books, one of the most fun parts of the story of the series is like discovering all of the cool powers that each of the characters has. And it happens early with like Perrin, who has the wolves, and Rand, we eventually find, has like the one power, and Matt has like the horn and like all of that stuff that we'll get to. And Egwene and Nynaeve are both very, very powerful in the one power, but now we're discovering that Egwene has a new thing to learn, and it's this whole dream situation. And so it's a very intriguing concept, and I'm excited to see more of it.
I love it. I thought it was so good, and I like that last moment of being like, "Oh my god, you're from my dreams." It's the best. It's really good. It feels quite epic.
She's like, "No, you were in my dream."
That's right. That's right. Especially just the landscapes of the show. It's just like the cinematography is incredible, and then it's like that moment. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. So Perrin is also going to get to the two rivers, and this is very much like as you said, sort of book 4 stuff. They very quickly see, first of all, Loyal using the proper ways method. They see that somebody else has taken the ways here. They get into town. They are a big spectacle in a small town. These two Aiel, Loyal and Perrin with his golden eyes. And they run into Egwene's family, who take them into the tavern, and they learn the White Cloaks are here, and stuff is all, the Trollocs are still attacking, and also the Aes Sedai, whose name I can't remember, is here. And oh boy,
let me pull it up. I have it here. Meryn, right?
Yeah. I don't think so.
Meryn Alver? Yeah, I think so. Is that right?
No, sorry, the Aes Sedai's name.
Oh yeah, sorry, I don't have. Yeah, sorry, I don't have that.
I think it's like an A. It's just like I can be very bad.
Yeah,
with
I
names,
know.
Occasionally. But you know what I'm talking about. The green with the warders. One of the warders has died. She is now wearing his ashes on her face, and she's got some drama.
Alana, right?
Yes, that rings a little more true to me.
Maxim is her warder. Alana and Maxim.
Mm-hmm.
I got it. We got it. Don't at us. Yeah.
So I think this is just like such a cool recipe for a story here. Back in the hometown, but things have changed. Things are wrong. There's Trollocs attacking. The White Cloaks are there. The White Cloaks are bad news. We know this. However, the White Cloaks are also the only protection this town has against the Trollocs at the moment. In addition to that, things are complicated because the White Cloaks are led by the son of the guy that Perrin murdered. And murdered is maybe a loaded term there, but in the finale of season 2, during the battle at Falm, Perrin killed this guy Bornholt, and he has some history with his son because he escaped from White Cloak captivity, and knows this guy's son. And so now this guy's son, who his father has now been killed by Perrin, is after Perrin, believes him to be a dark friend. And he's gone to the Two Rivers to try to see if he can find Perrin. And so there's all of these different complications to this situation. This is, I think, a very fun thing because coming back to where you came from now that you have experienced so many things is such a cool kind of thing to do. And so this is sort of like a new Perrin. We're also, again, not just forgetting about the fact that his wife died,
Yep. Yep.
and really like hammering home all of these things. Like, these people are still important. We're not forgetting where you came from, and this whole setup feels very good.
Yeah, I like it too. I think there's a little bit of like, I gotta turn yourself in. Okay, all right, yeah, we'll see if that, we'll see if that works. That happens, but
Right.
they'll like, come on, parent, don't do that. But it's fine. That's what he'll do. He's like a brave young man. He'll turn himself in. He's good. He's a good boy. So it's good. I like it too. I like going back to the Two Rivers and hanging out there, just see how things have affected them as well, and how things that have been happening in general, and we get the word that like there are more Trolloc attacks still happening, and this is interesting to me too in terms of like the way the White Cloaks are, um you know basically being like, yeah, we'll fight off the Trolloc, but also like we want to kill Barrett, like it's an interesting situation for the Two Rivers folk to like be caught in the middle of, that
Mhm.
feels very real, too real, of like, no, we're doing all the good stuff. We're killing Trollocs. We're fine. You got to trust us. But then also just give us this thing that we want. It's good.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
compelling.
And there's also like and I'm getting a little bit, I don't remember what was episode 2, what was episode 3, but we also have the added complication of there are some hunters of the horn around as well. And
That's
they
episode
have,
3, but yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. We
Um
could, as we move into maybe episode 3. Yeah, it's Lord Luke, Hunter of the Horn, arrives, and the Coffin family has been kidnapped by the White
mhm.
Cloaks. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I thought a great scene with Perrin and Alana talking about like loss and different customs, and how they're both sort of still grieving. Perrin still grieving, and Alana very freshly grieving. And then yes, these new hunters of the horn, which is very very funny, I think, to us as viewers and Perrin as a person who knows exactly where the horn is,
Yeah.
to be like,
Well,
oh, you're hunting
or
this
does
thing?
he?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah, and we learn about we learned the name Fail. Is that how we say her
Yes,
name? Fail? Is that how we're
Aiel.
saying it?
Um,
Fael. Yeah, okay, yeah. See?
Yes,
Yeah.
it's initial. She well. So what happens is that on the hunt, you may sometimes choose like a hunter's name for yourself, something along those lines. And she had chosen the name Mandarb, which is the name of Rand's horse. And so Perrin thought that was very funny.
Yes.
But she eventually reveals her true name, Fail, and so again, is sort of like setting up a bunch of different pieces on this board. You've got the question of like, who were the people that seemed to come from the ways? Was it Alana, or was it, is there somebody else here that we need to be looking out for?
Yeah.
What about the White Cloaks? What is happening there? How are we going to navigate the situation? Even if we get rid of the White Cloaks, then we still have to deal with Trollocs. They're out for Perrin's blood. Do we give him up? Do we let him turn himself in? There are so many different factors going on here, and very just fun little fun story here to follow in Two
Y
Rivers.
I think it's like it's pretty simple. I feel like the motivations, like in terms of like in
Yeah.
other stuff we're talking about, like we have all these like we're talking about the prophecy, and when we're with Rand, we're like Kara Khan and the Iowis and the Threefold and all this stuff. This is like we're
You
like
say that, but we spent about 60 seconds trying to remember Alana's name.
I know, but it's because it's too basic actually. If her name was like more out there, I'd be like, oh yeah, the Wheel of Time name, but her name is
Mm.
Alana. Like that's too simple. So yeah, true. But this one is like, we want to kill Perrin. Perrin doesn't want to be killed. Wants to save the Two Rivers people, and there's some people looking for a horn. Pretty standard, pretty simple stuff. We got it.
Yeah. So good stuff there. Very excited to see where that one continues. Let's see what else do we have here. So back at the tower, Min is back. Min, who sees visions of the future. We are reminded of this in episode 3 that in season 2, she was in the cell with Matt. They escaped together and or let loose. I don't remember actually. And then she betrayed him to Ishmael, but then ultimately still did not fully betray him. And she was promised that Ishmael said she would take away her visions. She does not like her visions, and now this is like a very clear sort of connection between her and Matt, even further, that like they both now are suffering from similar ailments, that they both have these things in their heads that they can't escape from, which I thought was a very fun way of continuing to like forge that bond between the two of them. And Min has been directed by Swan to be a servant around the tower so that she can do readings on people and essentially be a spy. And the information she gathers is there's 2 pieces of information that seems to be gathered from Min before it seems Min eventually leaves the tower in secret.
Yep.
The 2 pieces of information are: 1, there is a battle coming, and it's not the one you just fought. There's a bunch of you that's going to die, and I don't know when it's coming.
Mhm.
And number 2, I have fallen right into Elida's trap, and I'm going to give you information that is going to hurt you, which is that the Red Sitter is going to call for a vote, even when she's actually not going to call for a vote, which is going to prompt Swan. And this is all kind of like alluded to. We don't directly see this happen, but basically Elida tells Min that there is a vote that's going to be called. Min tells Swan. Swan, thinking she is being politically savvy, sends the sitter off to go take care of Mazarim Time, who is a false dragon, and thinking this will prevent her from being able to call a vote. But in reality, it just opens up a seat for Elida to get in there, which is exactly what Elida wanted in the first place.
It is really fun. I like this stuff. I like the sort of like political machinations of the White Tower a lot. I think
Mhm.
this is like, to me, some of the most interesting content in the show. I think that is probably unsurprising from a podcast that is on the reality TV show network, podcast network. But this is all very good. Seems all very logical. You feel bad that Swan's being tricked, but it's very fun. Elida is I think it's so fun. We talked about it a little bit before, but I think she's a very good. It's just being portrayed excellently here, and it's very fun to watch her work
Mhm.
as we set up everything that's happening in the White Tower, and Min heading off to follow Nynaeve, Elaine, and Matt. So yeah,
Yes, and Nynaeve and Elaine, have this whole like interrogation scene, and I'm pretty happy that like the interrogation was a failure, because I do think it would have been silly if it's like, oh man, how will you two succeed where everyone else has failed? Oh, by doing very basic negotiation tricks, like
yeah,
interrogation tricks. Like, nope, none of that worked. They just lied to you. Instead, they used the knowledge that they had, that Nynaeve had, of Leandrin to go look at where she found her with her son, found that he was gone, but instead there was this symbol. They discovered that this symbol is supposed to be placed where the person dies and where they were born. And where was he born? In Taichiko, I think, something along those lines.
yes. Tenchiko, I think maybe.
Tenchiko,
Yeah,
something along those
Tenchiko.
lines.
And we're gonna learn there that basically what she's trying to do is get one of the collars that was attached to Egwene last season, but one that will work on a man. Is basically the plan. And so that's what Leandrin's doing. She pulls the heart out of a man. That was pretty wild. Just straight up pulled the heart out of a person. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the other part of this is Mogdian is secretly in disguise there and figures
Yes.
out what
Well,
she's
so
doing.
I think first of all, like continuing to have great stuff from Leandrin as a villain, who just has so much like solid backstory here. Of like you learn so much from this in such a short amount of time, and it speaks so cleanly into her character that she was essentially like a child bride, forced to give birth in this tiny little room, and then went off to be an Aes Sedai, who hated men, and wanted to
Sure,
subjugate them,
sure.
and then raised that, like tried to take care of her son as much as possible. And is now back. She's finally free from the chains of the Aes Sedai. She is also a dark friend, which allowed her to escape the chains of the Aes Sedai, which allows her to use the one power against other people, in a way that other Aes Sedai might be limited, and also allows her to lie. And it's this freedom that allows her to be able to like fully take revenge on some of the ancestors of the people that subjugated her in the first place, and rip their hearts out, and so on and so forth. And it's just all cool stuff, but it also ties into her and the Dark One's desire to, or the Forsaken at the very least, which we learn is Mogideon here, desire to chain Rand with this like bracelet and I guess pacifier situation.
Whatever, yeah.
Mogideon, really like the big bad of the Forsaken at the moment. We had this scene at the beginning of episode 3, which reveals that Gabriel is in fact a Forsaken. We also see what's his name, Samael, there, I believe, and Lanfear is essentially trying to form an alliance, if we're playing Survivor, by saying, hey, Mogideon sucks, and she knows she can't take us one-on-one, so she's going to try to sort of like kill us one off, piece by piece. But if we stand together, then we will prevent her from doing that. But Samael doesn't seem particularly fond of Lanfear here. Like, hey, you just love lose Theron. You're going to betray us like you did before.
The other just small piece in here is that Ravine says, I'll think about. I'm going to take this back to, and he mentions 2 other Forsaken. I think Grandel. But the naming, apologies, which I'll try to get him as we get. Semiraj. I don't know. 2 other people, 2 other Forsaken that he seemingly is working with separately as well, who are not at the meeting, but he has a connection to. So more.
Did I get it wrong?
Forsaken.
Is it not Samael? Is it
No. Lanfear and
Ravine?
Samael and Ravine are all in the thing. But then Ravine is like, I'm gonna go back and take this to like 2 other Forsaken, right? Am I right?
Well, there's 3 of them there, right? And it's Gabriel.
It's Gabriel, Samael, and Lanfear.
And Lanfear.
And Ravine's like, with the 3 of them, like, that's great. I'm gonna go talk to these 2 other Forsaken that are not here at the moment. Am I not right? Am I wrong?
Who's who's Ravine?
Ravine is Gabriel, right?
Ravine is Gabriel. Okay, that's where I was getting confused.
Sorry.
That is what I had. I was thinking that might be the case. Ravine is the name of the Forsaken.
Yes.
And Gabriel is like the cover name.
Yes. Sorry. I see why that's confusing now, as I'm like not saying the same thing you're asking me. But yes, there's 3 of them. Ravine / Gabriel is like, it's great. I'm gonna go talk to these other 2 Forsaken to tell them about this proposal. So just saying, there are 6 Forsaken on the, like, not that we've seen, but like that are around and alive, whatever. The 3 that are there, 2 that Gabriel is chatting with, and I keep saying her name wrong, but the big bad of the Forsaken right now.
Mogideon, I think, is
I keep saying,
how they're pronouncing it.
Mogideon.
I definitely, when I read it as like Mogideon or something.
That's what I was saying, I think, and then realizing that. But this is exactly like when I was reading Hermione for years, and then finally was hearing it like, oh, that was what I was saying.
Hermione.
Hermione. Yeah.
So yes, fun little Forsaken meeting. The Forsaken discussions in the books always felt super mustache twirly to me. So if anything in the show, they're a little more realistic.
I agree with that. I do. Yeah.
So this is pretty fun. Of course, Ravine and or Gabriel, it's then revealed, has also known that Moghedien was actually there the whole time,
Yeah.
watching, listening. And so there's a lot of different games being played here. And it'll be very fun to see their machinations face off against one another.
If Rafe really wanted to be true to the books, what he would actually do is at the very beginning of every season, he would throw in a prologue that makes no sense to me. That's what that's what I really need to have the true authentic Wheel of Time book reader experience, you know? Like
Mhm.
what is I'm like, I just want to hang out with Rand again. What's going on?
All right. Anything else to touch on before we talk a little bit more book spoileriness?
Just there's some Aiel stuff happening, and we haven't really talked
Right.
about like
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
the goal here is. That basically they want to get this Rand and Lanfear end up talking in a dream. Lanfear talks to Rand through a dream, and they want to get a Sangril. Is that how we're saying? Is that how we're saying it? Together,
Sangreal or something along those lines.
Sangreal. Yeah. And yeah, that seems to be the big
So
motivation.
yeah, just to set this up maybe a little bit, this whole idea of like items of power from the White Tower that were stolen by Leandrin. There are various like objects that are infused, and I'm not an expert in this by any means, but various objects that are infused with the one power that operates as sort of magical items, have their own use. So like for instance, the arches are kind of one of those things. And this like bracelet control device, potentially also one of those things. There are varying degrees of power, and I believe that Rand used one in season 1 to face off against Ishmael, something that will like amplify his power. There are degrees of power that these things, and there's I think also a separation between items that will like enhance your power and items that have like their own specific use case that are
Right.
sort of independent from the one from your use of the one power. Kalendor, the sword, is like the most powerful amplifying item that sort of exists theoretically for male power, male one power channeling. Lanfear would like to also have the female version of that.
Yeah.
The most powerful amplifier for female channelers, so that together with Kalendor and this other object combined, wielded by a man and a woman, she believes, at least she is proposing to Rand, that she believes that together these two powerful objects wielded by the two of them will be enough to defeat the Dark Lord, and that will allow her to be free of the oaths that she took to the Dark Lord that bind her currently, in ways that I don't think have been like fully explained yet in the show.
Yeah. And then the last thing I think just about like the thing I just want to touch on with the Aiel waste is that I feel like the other thing that I really loved about finally getting the Aiel waste is I think there's this idea of like this idea of like, oh, we'll go, and the people who are there are one people. And we very quickly learn like, no, there are several different groups of different Aiel. So that we hear Shido. Those are the folks who have killed some people in the Aiel waste.
They killed them with spears and made it look like they were killed with swords. The Aiel do not like swords, has been made clear to us.
Right. So all this to say, there's going to be interplay between, it's not like he can, if he's thinking already like, oh my God, I have to go and, there's a prophecy potentially about me. Well, now it's further complicated by the idea that like, it's not just one group of Aiel that he has to, like, it's not all of the Aiel. He's going to have to figure out how to, communicate, navigate through all of these different groups of Aiel. So we put that on the board in this episode as well.
And Avienda also makes it clear that like while the prophecy for the Dragon Reborn is like he will either destroy the world or save it, the prophecy for the Aiel, for the Kaira Karn, is that he will destroy them, but through that will give them a sort of like a rebirth process where like a few of them will survive, and so like that kind of speaks to the Aiel culture, that they are like actively looking for this person and willing to like do this. So like we know that this will destroy us, but it is what it is necessary, essentially. So cool stuff. And I think there's a lot of, so they are on their way to a place that is where the wise ones go and the sort of like clan leaders go to become it's another kind of like arches situation kind of place, right?
Ceremonial type of
Like some sort
journey
of thing that
thing.
they need to do in order to, become accepted, whatever the
Yeah.
case is, and
Yeah.
we'll find out what that is when we get there.
It was all very good. If people are checking out now, I thought this was really excellent. I would love to know what people thought of the first 3 episodes. Can send a message on social media or through the YouTube comments. But I thought this was really good. I thought this was really strong. I think there's so much going on, and I actually think it's like credit deserved that I feel like I am not very plainly, I am not the utmost expert on this, and I feel like I'm following it to a degree that I'm finding it incredibly enjoyable. So that sort of is for me then my litmus test of like, and again, I think if you're a much bigger fit, like if you've like read all the books and you're like not jiving with it, I understand that completely. Just from my own personal experiences, this is working on a wavelength that this is just for candidly, this is a little bit of like, this makes me think lesser of Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, which I really like,
Yeah.
but I'm like, oh my God, this is like how you do this type, and both on Amazon Prime, but this is how you do the like expansive world building in a way that I think very clearly shows the flaws in Rings of Power's world building, because this is able to do a lot more than they're doing, I think.
I completely agree. I think that I think so. So my experience of the Wheel of Time so far has been that I think it's been very, very good. It hasn't been fully there, right? It hasn't quite made it all the way there yet. And my hope was that, with the fact that season 2 is better than season 1, season 3 is the first season where they haven't had any like major issues with COVID or strikes. And there's always the sense for me, there's always been the sense for me that like it has potential to be like peak TV. There's a small hope in me that it will get there. I think what I have come to the conclusion for with season 3 is that I don't think it's ever going to get there. I don't think it's going to be like peak quality TV. There are still like there's a little bit of clunkiness around it. Some of the editing is a little clunky at times, in particular, like some of the cuts, some of the
I,
choices that they have to make to condense
yeah,
things.
yeah.
Some of the dialogue on occasion, like it's not 100% there, but I think it's really, really, really fun and enjoyable, and still has a lot of depth, character, plot, theme, and I think it's doing close to as best as they can with with the material and conditions that they have to make it work. And despite some of the clunkiness, like I am enthralled watching each episode, and I really want to watch each next episode. And I really want to see the whole thing play out. I'm just having a lot of fun with it.
I think the barrier to entry in terms of it being like an all-timer prestige TV show is honestly just, I think Game of Thrones was able to reach that thing because they snuck the magic in the back end. And so the fact that I have to in this episode not only have to like remember everybody's name and then also make sure I'm pronouncing like Sangreal and Karakarn and Kalendor and all of these things correctly is just, I think, frankly, a barrier to entry on the
I mean,
on the show, which I'm struggling to think of another example that threw. There are shows that certainly throw vernacular out, but not. I think they often like the vernacular is not quite as like, and I love it. I love that the show is like immersed in the world, in the world building of Robert Jordan to be what it is and not actually shy away from the fact that it's like super, super nerdy, I don't know if
well, I think again, it's sort of like this is a function. I think more of the time constraint than anything. Like
I
it
agree.
is. So 15 books, 4.4 million words of story and world building condensed into 8 episodes of television per season for theoretically 8 seasons. There's 4.4 million words of like getting you used to all of this terminology and all of the characters that the show has to do in a considerably less amount of a smaller amount of time. If the show, because like if the show had more time, I don't think it's as an issue that like that it is the way it is. If as long as like you can slowly introduce these concepts and spend more time with them, then you get to learn, you get to know them more. Like, you know, millions and millions of people, like a massive pop culture event Game of Thrones was, and all of those people know like Khaleesi, and
Hey, I agree.
you know, like the various, which is, yes, I think to your point, like Game of Thrones was afforded an opportunity to ease into these things largely because of the structure of those books. Whereas the structure of Wheel of Time didn't allow for it as much. The first book
Yeah,
of Wheel of Time does take its time for sure,
yeah.
but given the time frame that this show had versus Game of Thrones, it didn't have the time to set up in the same way that the books did, and that is, I think, a little bit of an issue for show archers, but not that much of an issue, I think, overall.
Also, expand your X-ray feature, Amazon Prime. It's the best thing you have going for a show that has this much going on. That the fact that the only thing that like pulls up is the cast. There should be. This is the perfect show to like. I love that I can go back and now like X-ray view as I'm watching it. There is like I think some like trivia-y stuff in there, but it's a good platform to have the show on. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk a bit about some book stuff then. If you're bouncing out now, thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week. Hopefully, it will be easier to only have to talk about one episode at a time. We can get a little more depth in there. But we'll be back. We'll talk about next week's episode 4. Very excited to do so. Make sure you're subscribed in the meantime. But without any further ado, let's talk some book spoilery stuff. Now, to set the stage here, we do not intend to go like deep spoilers. We're not really talking about like end game stuff. Grace doesn't even know end game stuff. So I'm not going to promise that like you won't get allusion. Like I'm not going to be as careful as I am in the show only version. We may allude to things that if you're really trying to read into it, you might be able to make some assumptions here or there. I'm not sure, but we're really just focusing on what's in front of us and like the end result of it. So for example, if we were doing this podcast only up through episode 2, we would be like, hey, Gabriel, right? Like, come on, when are they going to reveal that he's actually a Forsaken? Stuff like that. Immediate things we are expecting to have immediate reveals or maybe slightly long-term things. We're not going to go too deep beyond what's happening. So I think in particular, we're looking at like Shadow Rises and the storyline that Perrin is going to go through. We'll probably talk through most of that. We'll talk about what's happening in the Isle of Waste and various parts of these things. But we won't go too far beyond that. That's the idea.
I think you can even bucket a lot of the things that we see these 3 episodes in terms of whether they are completely new to sort of like to and why they did that. The best example I think is like this battle doesn't happen in the book. It's like the Black Aja leave. There's not a big battle.
They leave. They are confronted. There is a bit of a scuffle. A couple people die. To my memory, it's just not shown. So like theoretically, if we're gonna go like House of the Dragon style, this could have happened, and like the official story was that like no, it was actually totally chill. Certainly
That's
not
true.
to this degree though. Not open in the public streets, I would imagine.
Right. And then I think you have this next layer of things where it's like this stuff all happens, but it happens sooner than we were expecting. And then there's sort of like I think a mixture in terms of like maybe that even happens much later, or we're like moving stuff into this book that doesn't happen here basically. To me the best example of that is Gabriel and Ravine, that like we get this in Shadow Rising, but we just don't get it as quickly as we got it. That gets withheld until the end of the book basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I mean I think like first off I want to say that like for me I'm not sure. I think it's interesting to me that the general consensus around this show seems to be that if you haven't read the books, you are more likely to enjoy the show, because from my perspective, at the very least, the fact that I've read the books and the fact that I know what's coming makes the show, I think, better to me than it otherwise would be. But that's just me, because like I'm watching things and I'm like noticing how they're being set up and being able to sort of see like, oh, they're making this change because of this, and that's an interesting choice. And so I'm really enjoying that stuff. I think the first and biggest and probably most controversial change of these first 3 episodes. You already mentioned it. Elaine and Avienda. It seems
Yep.
to have really ruffled some feathers. For, I would say, probably some obvious reasons. But then, then there's also like it's one of those things that like straddles that line of like it just happens to be the most controversial thing. It also happens to be a situation where we're involving like LGBT things being added in.
Can I say
and it's like a deviation from the books.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I'm trying to be better at not interrupting, Taran.
That's fine.
I'm failing. Which is I feel like the critique I've seen that feels like the most it's the closest to a good faith argument about it, which is that a lot of characters over the course of the books love Rand. Like the characters are in love with Rand. That is such an important thing that happens, and I think is the result of sort of this like he's the chosen one, people, there's this like thing that Robert Jordan is trying to write, as in like he's sort of like undeniable in terms of like he's the dragon. People like fall, and many characters fall in love with him. That I feel like I have heard this complaint from other people who read it. I feel like I'm trying to just parse this, and I feel like people feel that more as I feel like I hear that more as people are reading it than I'm hearing that thing from people who have read everything. So that's just like, I just want to clarify. Like, I feel like when I'm talking to other people, I'm like, God, everyone's in love with Rand. I know, but it's like people who are reading the books, can't remember quite exactly if like people who've read the whole thing feel that same way. So part of me, just in trying to articulate this, is that like one of these characters, has a romantic thing where it involves Rand, and I think people are worried about when you now have set up like that, oh, actually the character is queer, that means we're not going to get this. And like, these are the reasons that I don't really know that I can articulate. Like, these are the reasons why it's actually important for people to fall in love with Rand and for Rand to, blah, 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 blah. That, I don't know whether that's true. Like, does that resonate with you? Like, I feel like that's what I've been seeing in terms of like this story and why people are indifferent than just being like, oh my God, it's woke. Being like, it's actually changing people's relationships with other characters, specifically Rand.
So there's a lot here, and this actually, as you're talking, is making me realize that this might actually be I don't
Too spoilery for the future?
Here's my problem. I don't remember how deep these things go.
Yeah.
But basically, like like Rand has a little bit of a harem situation going on. That is sort of what Robert Jordan wrote for him. And so basically what they are doing here is going like, let's get ahead of this a little bit.
Yes. And then some people, I think, in response were like, oh no, it's actually so important that the way Robert Jordan wrote Rand, that everybody is in love with him, is super important to the text. And then I think you can just have a discussion. I feel like I have it because I don't know the whole story, and I can't.
I mean,
I
would personally disagree. I think that, but again, this is for me. I think my viewpoint is represented. I think there are people who agree with me. I don't think it's necessarily like the dominant discussion on the series, but like there are definitely aspects of the books that I not like take serious issue with, but definitely annoyed me over the course of the books. One of them is how often characters, oh man, they're just naked now. Sorry, haha. Look at them being naked, and they didn't want to be. Oh, look at them naked again. And oh, now they're getting spanked. Oh boy, like it happens a lot to the point where it gets pretty tiresome for me. Another is this like very childish gender thing, the men and the women constantly, battling in there. And this is one of the themes of the books to some degree, but I do think it lingers a bit longer than it needs to.
The running line of like Matt always thinking that Rand and Perrin are better with, like they all think each other are better with women.
That's great. I love it. Very fun. Very fun.
You can't really translate that as well, that they constantly are thinking it every time they're interacting with a woman, but it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another one of the issues I've had with it is generally how the romances develop. And this is an issue I have with a lot of fantasy in general, especially fantasy that isn't as modern is that like romance in fantasy is often written as like they met and they were in love. Like, and to Robert Jordan's credit, that is not the case with like a decent amount of what happens here. I think that there's still a lot of room for development in the books, but again, to the credit of Rand's little harem situation, they each have their own sort of little plot, but generally, I think that the way that they're going about this makes a lot of sense. There's some arguments from people who've read the books that a relationship between Elaine and Avienda is actually not so far fetched based on some of the text. You know, they are described as having like a sister-like relationship, which eventually then means like sister wives, which is a little weird. But like the way that they talk about like there are some people who say like if you read into it, you could definitely interpret this in a certain way. There are others that adamantly say this relationship was never described as physical, romantic, or anything like that. And I think that if you are strictly trying to, be true to the text of the book, there are decent arguments in both directions. Personally, I don't particularly care about being super faithful to the books. I think that this makes the relationship situation feel a lot more organic and realistic. And something that can be developed a lot more cleanly in terms of just like actual character development and how this ends up in the way that it does. And to me, it just makes so much sense. Like we have another few decades worth of like relationship dynamics, people who are in various kinds of like polyamorous or other honestly relationship descriptors that I'm not familiar with, but like that exist in this kind of way. That like it just makes sense to kind of explore in this direction, I think. And I also, for what it's worth, think it's a fun little sort of misdirect because when you read the books and you're introduced to many of these characters, you kind of just instantly go like, oh yeah, so they're just in love with Rand and they're just eventually gonna get together. And maybe there's some sense of like who will he choose, but I don't think so. I remember as a kid being like, so Rand just gets a bunch of women.
Yeah. Yeah.
which I personally like. I don't think is super important for his character generally.
I think it yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's in, if I try to think it without, I don't feel like I'm like the utmost expert here, but I do feel like it's in there to show that he is sort of like, this is like things revolve around him. He is sort of like undeniably, the center of everything that happens. And he, I think it's funny because in the way you're talking about the way in which he tries to subvert tropes, this feels like almost the most it's almost like satire on the trope of like that everybody is in love with the chosen one. So I think that there's other ways that they can do this and that they have still extremely, I think the connections that he built are the ones that I actually think are the ones that are the most interesting. For the ones that they've kept in the show, sorry, are the ones that from the book I think are the most interesting and compelling. So I'm kind of fine with it. And it also doesn't mean that there can't be some of this in the future if they wanted to, because the bisexuality exists as well. So yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah. So I ultimately like it. Just the second I saw it, it was just like, yeah, that makes so much sense. And it will make what eventually happens make even more sense to me. So it honestly didn't even cross like my radar as something that would be that controversial. But of course,
I'll tell you, Taran, I got my press junket list, and it was like you have Rosamund Pike and Yasha Shirtat, they're together, and like all these people, and I was like, and then it was like Sierra Coveney and Ayula Smart who plays together. I was like, okay, all right, like let me try and figure out what I'm talking. And then I watched the episode, I was like, oh, that's why they're together. That's why they were sitting next to. I'm sure all day, all they got was like, hey, you two kiss in the show. Yeah, so it was kind of fun.
So another point of contention here, Moraine working with Lanfear is a fairly sort of deviant is not the word I'm looking for.
Deviation is what you mean, I
Deviation,
think.
thank you.
Mhm.
Is definitely a deviation from the series. But one that again for me just works. Like they are definitely like bitter enemies. However, they do have quite a like a mirrored sort of journey in the books. They do, you know, and it's something that I didn't even think of a lot when I read the books, but like they do really mirror each other in a lot of ways in the in their methods and the way that they go about things. And so I think putting this in makes their journey and arc through the series together, like as the relationship between the two of them makes it work even better, I think. And there's a lot to do with Moraine's story that I don't know how they're going to handle in the show. Obviously, you know, if we're talking about this general span of books, we know that Moraine kind of goes away. Is kind of just she's not really in the books after a couple
So
of them.
annoying. It's so annoying.
So
I love
like
her.
I can't imagine that they're going to do that in the show, at least to the same degree, because this is like, you know, in the same way that, you know, like you got to keep the star power around. Like, so like when and how and where are they going to do this? And of course, that storyline involves Lanfear pretty heavily. So I'm very curious to know where they go with this, but I have to imagine that this not only makes sense for character, but also I think has big implications for where things can go, and that's in a good way, I think.
I think you nailed why it works when we did our previous section, which is that they're two sides of the same coin in terms of trying to do similar things, but for different reasons. And that is completely compelling. And it makes a ton of sense that they would start to think about working together. It totally works for me. On top of that, I think it makes character sense, that I think it works just in the performances. I think it's very exciting to, you know, this is actually a much better way than, you know, if we want to keep comparing it to Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. I don't know if we do, but the way in which like that show kept being like, we got to get these two actors in the same scenes together because they're we love when they're together. It's like, yeah, but now it's contrived. This to me so far doesn't feel contrived. I like it quite a bit. The piece about whether or not Moraine and Rosamund Pike specifically could not be on the show, the fact that she's actually an executive producer actually means that maybe they actually could, because she could be involved in the show and still like sort of, you know, get a paycheck from the show, presumably.
That's,
So the
I mean,
show,
that's honestly, that is very true. And I mean, like, it is quite an ensemble. Like, you know, even in this season so far, I think she has taken a little bit more of a back seat in terms of like focus. So, yeah, you know what? There is actually a decent chance I could see that happening.
there's a thing in wrestling right now where I think people are starting to realize just how impactful like people going away can be for then coming back. And I think the biggest challenge to this is that like there's so few episodes in the season that, like, you know, if you go away for 5 episodes, she's basically not in this in the season anymore. So I mean, could you even do that? I don't know, but it is interesting. I do think it's interesting, and because she's executive producer, if they have that conversation like between her and Rafe about like actually the best thing for Moraine's storyline is actually to not be on the show for a little while, I think that could be very interesting. They also could, yeah, they could figure it. I'm not saying I don't want Rosamund Pike on the show. I'm happy to have her, but I think it's interesting to think about.
Yeah. We also mentioned the opening for Morghese, the introduction to her character. I've seen some complaints about this, that this does not track for the reader's understanding of Morghese's character. But again, I've seen some debate about this because Morghese did win a succession war. She is known for, you know, ordering executions.
She got to be in charge of Waystar Royco, right? She won the succession war.
Yeah.
Yeah. Her and
She was
Tom,
the
I think,
best. She was the best boy, the
yeah,
eldest.
that's right. That's right.
And so again though, I just think for me that complaint doesn't track. It's, for me it would be too nitpicky. I think that this is a perfectly valid way to introduce her character, especially because again, you don't have a lot of time, and she is you know, her and especially Elida are important characters to introduce. And so to introduce them in such a memorable way, I think is really important. Shows her power, and I think that's vital because you can still then soften her afterward. This is a show where a lot of stuff is happening, a lot of bad things are happening, and a lot of very, very bad people. Like Lanfear right now is a protagonist, like straight up. She's just like she's a very like, dark protagonist, but Mogideon is like the big bad right now. Lanfear is somebody who you're kind of like rooting for on occasion, or at the very least, you're kind of like a little bit like, I'm not sure what to do here. And if she did a really good thing, you'd be like, yeah, go Lanfear, right? So this isn't a show where we're like, well, she murdered some people, so she's just a bad person, we can never root for her again. Is definitely not the case. I think that you can very easily soften Morghese, as they sort of did in the same very episode, by sort of like adhering to Elaine's wishes. I didn't have a problem with it at all. I thought it was a very effective way of introducing her character. That's sort of my thoughts.
I agree. I don't know if I really love the scene. I do feel like I'm like a little bit like, not that people should discredit my opinion on this, but like without the full context of everything that happens, I'm fine with it because I thought it worked in the moment. Other people could have an argument to say it doesn't work because X, Y, and Z that happens in future plot points. For now, I'm totally fine with it. I love it. I think it actually sets up a very interesting dynamic between Elaine and Morghese in the way that I feel like Elaine has a very strong moral center, and it's not that Morghese didn't, but the inevitability of being a ruler means you have to make sometimes like these awful, it's like being king queen is not necessarily like morally good thing to be or do, yet it's the path that Elaine is going to be on. So I think that is interesting. So
yeah, and I've seen the argument that like if you introduce Morghese in this way, basically under the influence of Ravine, aka Gabriel, she becomes more ruthless and inept in some ways, and so the difference between those two things will feel less impactful. Like, hey, she's supposed to be this good queen, but she's making all these ruthless and bad decisions under the influence of this guy. I don't think that's necessary, especially because in the books we do not really get the perspective. We are not up close with Gabriel in the same way that we already are in the show, I think. So
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that the fact that he's there and we know that he's very powerful and able to do things, I think is more than enough than we need for watching it. And there are plenty of ways to introduce this concept to the characters as well.
What I like is that this thing is from 20 years earlier, right? So the scene. So in essence, we've seen her do, a pretty ruthless thing. I think the stakes of this world are like, there is like the general badness of the things that are happening. There's also this like the Forsaken and the Dark One and like all of this stuff that's like, imagine what she would do if she was being under the influence of somebody who is like evil rather than like I don't even want to say she's like lawful evil, but like she's doing this. She says, like, she literally says, like, we can't have another succession crisis. Like, that's what and it's like, not that I'm justifying what she does. It's pretty bad, but it's to me different than like this, like, and I do think to some degree there's sort of like this, like, pretty tropey stereotype, like good versus evil thing of like, you're talking about the mustache twirlingness of the Forsaken. Like, I still think that to a degree is like, that is there. They want the world to be even like worse off than it is. And so imagining that Morghese is somebody who would do that on her own and now potentially under the influence of the Forsaken could do worse things is interesting to me. It's compelling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm continuing, I already alluded to this, but I'm continuing to love the changes they've made to Leandrin.
I agree.
Leandrin's character in the books is very flat, and is nowhere. If you are listening to this because you just like the context from the books and you haven't actually read them yourself, Leandrin in the books is basically just like your typical like school bully essentially at the White Tower, who then after she leaves and takes the stuff just kind of disappears for a while, and never really is featured in nearly as much detail as they are in the show. They've really gone in on her character in a really effective way. and developed her and characterized her in such a compelling way that I really really like what they've done with her. There are so many, and this is again why it's like, yes, there are other changes. Maybe some of them are for the worse, but I think there are so many that are for the better. And Leandrin is absolutely one of those. And I'm really happy that we're spending time on her here, because I think it really works. And I'm genuinely interested to see like where they go with her character. Obviously I know sort of like where she goes in the books, but like given how much focus they've put on her so far, it makes me excited for actually like where things might end up.
Yeah, totally agree. I think she's maybe, I think outside of our main core, like Two Rivers folks, maybe the deepest character. I think probably, like, I think
Mhm.
at like, there's just so much there. I think they've done a really excellent job.
I'm also very happy with how they're building up Alana, despite my inability to remember her name. That like she is also a fairly important character in the books. For I mean, everyone is to some degree, but like she certainly has her roles to play.
Mhm.
And I've always felt like she was fairly underdeveloped in the books. I really like how they're developing her, especially her relationship to her warders, which is going to become very important. And like also like displaying her level of badassery as a green sitter. Like I know that there were some amount of complaints about like power scaling and should she have been able to fight off so many people on the streets of Tarvalon. But I think it tracks well enough. They're literally the battle Aja, and she's one of the more powerful ones. So and seeing her here, the conversation she's having with Perrin and with her warder, it all like I think is working really well and leading into her eventual storyline really well. I think.
There's a little bit of like map shuffling that this season seems to be. I mean, we've done this the whole time. I mean, like the most noticeable example is Matt not going through the ways at the gate at the end of season one, which they've released some footage. I think I saw this on my TikTok. I think that people were saying like that they fully had filmed him going into the ways and actually had to re-edit all of that because they found out that after the season ended due to mental health reasons, they were gonna like that guy wasn't gonna return to the show and they were gonna recast him. And so they actually like re-edited that, which makes that scene. I think it's impressive that they were able to like reconfigure all that to make it like them all calling back to Matt that he wasn't coming. Anyway, arguably, just talking about the way in which like we've moved like the way in which like like I believe Perrin goes to tear before he goes to like there's like some missing. I honestly don't mind. I really like where we're at with all the different characters. Like I really like the Perrin Alana stuff that's happening there.
Well,
I can't.
yeah, just to quickly like the Dragon Reborn is book 3. They go to Tyr, they get the sword, they get Kalendor. Um, totally makes sense for them to skip that right now.
Yeah,
Because he just puts it back.
yeah,
He just puts it back and then they go and do
yeah,
other things for a while.
yeah. That's true. Yeah, yeah. He does it. I guess the point of doing it is to like show, like he's trying to like
It's
amass.
yet another sign that like he is the Dragon Reborn because he has pulled the sword and so on and so forth. But
But
like
I don't, the idea that right now they're saying like actually like I know you like he did like like he made he's known as the Dragon Reborn. Like he stood on the top of the thing, the dragon, the fire dragon was like above him. Like people know that. Morena's also still being like, it's actually just not still great if everybody thinks you're the dragon. Like it makes my job harder if everybody knows that that's you. So I'm going to try to figure out how to do that. And actually, like, so she's like, but actually, we should go do this because it's like the powerful item that we think we need to be defeating the Forsaken. But it's actually like, I think smart to say, to actually only have like that one thing happen. And then for Rand to actually be like, actually, let's just go like, let's figure out this Aiel stuff first. Let's go there. And so actually, like, we can go. And actually, so I actually think the reshuffling of that does make some sense. I'm sure that there's reasons why it would have worked better or well the other way. I'm not mad at this readjusting of the traveling, the route that everyone
yes.
gets on. Yeah.
I'm also loving the Aiel so far.
Me too.
Just like I think they are very like this is another thing. Like when you've read the books, you can hear the exposition in the dialogue so much. And I don't know how noticeable that is if you haven't read the books, but like it's not in a way that feels bad or wrong, because like there are especially times when it feels very natural, the complaining about the use of the sword and then reiterating that with these are sword marks, or they could have been made to look like sword marks, and these are tuathaan, and they are the lost ones, and you shouldn't, like, they don't defend themselves. The only thing more anything less honorable than that is to kill them. And so, like, already a lot of good important points to hit with the Aiel. Also, I would say in general for me, what the one thing the show has done really well is that it has made everyone less annoying. And that includes the Aiel.
Yes.
And that also includes Fael.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
who very famously, amongst
Yeah.
many other characters, like all of whom I love as characters in the books, but like can be very grating at times, including Perrin himself a lot of the time.
Mhm.
I think all of that, like so many of the characters, maintain that general feel without the like incessantly grating dialogue that can occur in the books for me. The introduction to Fael I thought was really, really fun. And you definitely get exactly who she is as a character without the over the top sort of dramatic just dunking on Perrin constantly,
Uh-huh. Yeah, she's
which I thought
definitely
was
Nick.
fantastic.
It definitely has, I mean, there's definitely, when we talk about like everyone's in love with, there definitely is this like almost like childhood-ish like imagination of love and love where it's like the nagging stuff is like feels so like
That's all it is. It's
of a
literally the entire, like, you could sum up the entire like interactions between men and women on in the books as like grade school, I'm gonna make fun of the girl I like, and vice
yep,
versa.
yep,
That is, and quite frankly, it doesn't really evolve from that until kind of like Sanderson takes over.
right.
so,
Um
so
Yeah. The thing I wanted to say about the Aiel stuff and all that, the thing I wanted to kind of mention earlier, and I didn't really feel like it fit in well there, was we're talking about the CGI. I do think that the CGI looked bad. I also think that like if Rafe Judkins is in charge of the budget of the show, I do feel like a thing that they have, whether this is true or not, but like have maximized their budget on like costuming and not just that, but like to make sure that different places feel distinct within this world. Like I thought, like immediately, is it Tenchinko? Is that the name? Am I saying it wrong? I can't
Chico
remember.
or something.
I think so. Yeah. Like that to me, I can immediately be like, oh, I can see how this is distinct and unique. And there's like fashion here that's different
Mhm.
than places we've been before. And I think that like, honestly, I wonder whether like it would be less, if the show would feel more samey if like the budget was a little bit less in terms of this stuff. That I think maybe the people on the show have decided like it's actually, this is the stuff we actually want to spend a decent amount on,
I'm
instead of, if it was a choice between that and CGI, like it could not be. I don't have the inner
Yeah.
workings of the ledger, but it kind of feels that way to me. I don't know.
I completely agree. If I had to choose between, watching a cartoon character fall in half, or like not having the different on location sets, and the feel of the world feeling real, 1,000%, I'll take the little woman falling apart scene.
Me too.
That said, like,
Preferably, I'd love both. I'd like both, but
yeah. I mean, like, for me, if I'm making the show, and I'm not making the show, I've never even really been in this position before. But if I'm making the show, and this is what I got, and you know, I'm sure what happened is that they just didn't have time or budget to make this as good as it could have been. But if this is like the end result of like this is what we have, I'm just cutting that part out. Personally, I'm just cutting that part out because it really did stand out
yeah,
to me. But maybe it didn't stand out to other people. Is it worth it? Maybe, maybe not. But like, I think that what they do spend the budget on very, very well, as you mentioned, is the locations, the costuming. This does feel like a large, real world, and that is huge. That is
yeah.
way more important than like how intricately good the CG is at times. Yeah, for
I
sure.
agree. I agree.
All right. Anything else book wise to really like hone in on here?
No, one thing I'll flag for folks, especially folks who I think in this section might be a little more engaged in terms of our plan. Probably for this, we haven't talked about it, but we probably will be recording these in with not enough time to really get feedback each week. So we might be end up being a little bit delayed on if like there's something that people end up wanting to ask a question about. Whether or not we'll be able to address it in the week that that episode comes out, we might have to like revisit at the end of the week, but would love people to be letting us know what they think about the show and commenting on any of this stuff that we're talking about in terms of changes or adaptations. If you like it too, I love to hear whether people like it as well, because I feel like it's easier to say I don't like it and then to think if I do like it, I don't leave a note. So let us know. Not about our podcast, more about the show. That's what I mean.
Would love to hear feedback.
Yeah, I would also love to hear if you like the show, but
I am remembering also the Matt of it all. I'm curious about because obviously a huge part of Matt's story is that he is actually with Rand in the Isle Waste, and he is going to have his own experience in that, and that is like a massive catalyst for his entire plotline, which we get hints of with Min's vision. And so the fact that he is currently en route to Tenchiko is interesting to me. I'm wondering where and how he either ends up over with Rand again in the Threefold Land, or if perhaps somehow what happens with him ends up happening somewhere else or somehow else.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is I thought about this too. That's kind of why I brought the thing earlier about Matt being left behind. Well, he stays behind at the end of season 1. It's like they keep forgetting Matt. He's forgetting to go at the places where he needs to go. But I'm interested in that too. I mean, 5 episodes to get like you probably could, but it is interesting that he does not go with.
I mean, the fact that they set up the hanging stuff. And they teased the Ashadare last season. And they're going in with the old tongue. Like it feels like all of that needs to be resolved, would be resolved at the end of this season at the very least. So I would anticipate that like the conclusion to Matt's arc this season is like doing the thing and getting the Ashendare and like becoming Matt with the fedora and whatever. So like, but how does he get there? But how does it happen?
That I didn't go with the character who can go through the ways. Like you're like, it's like
right.
Loyal is it? He's at the 2 rivers, so you're like, he's if he was there, that would make. But no,
I'm not enough of again an expert on lore to know this, but like it feels feasible to me that he could have that experience somewhere else, possibly. But again, I don't know. I don't know enough about the intricacies of like how things work and how things happen. So, but like, I mean, because here's the thing. Matt's experience there does feel a little tacked on to me in the books. Like
I agree with that.
He just happens to like also do the thing and then has this whole separate really experience from Moraine and Rand. And so to me, it does feel like he could go on a different journey on his own, or maybe with Nynaeve and Elaine to some degree. And I also think that him being with Nynaeve and Elaine makes a lot of sense because that's where he ends up for a lot of the books anyway. And so building that relationship more makes a ton of sense. So like, yeah, if there's a way lore wise to get him to where he needs to be without needing to go to the Isle Waste, but then again, he does need to make certain relationships there. So that's another thing. So
I do believe people, I'm trying to remember which one. I feel like as I've been reading it, then people are like, oh yeah, and these are the ones that people like more than anything. I feel like people really like The Shadow Rising.
It's my favorite book.
My memory of it is that I didn't think that the climax of the book was as strong as I thought the climax of the other books had been. I actually feel like I felt like, oh, okay, like that's the ending. But they all do start to jumble together as well, even without having read all of them. I'm like trying to parse through of what happens when. That's sort of my recollection. I feel like I'm lower on the ending of the. I still think it's an amazing book, but that I feel like the ending of it, I'm more down on than other people. But
Perrin was my favorite character for a good portion of like the beginning books, and that all kind of culminated in the Shadow Rising, and so his whole plot in the Two Rivers I thought was my favorite to that point. Like I said, like the idea of like Perrin coming back to his hometown and like helping defend them against the White Cloaks and the Trollocs, and his whole storyline there, and then also like meeting Fael, and all of that stuff I thought was really, really fun, and culminated in a really fun way. And it was also like so contained and as you mentioned, sort of simple, with its own like contained kind of set of things. While everything else was beginning to get more expansive and epic, I really enjoyed it, and was really one of my favorite parts of the Robert Jordan era of books, at the very least. So I'm excited to see it play out. I think it's going to work really well on TV, personally.
I think now in retrospect, I'm looking through my notes where I was chatting with. I'll throw out a recommendation if you're really late in this podcast. If you're like, oh, I want more. I believe Of Screen and Page podcast is doing a lot of Wheel of Time. Of course, presently I chatted a little bit. It looks like I maybe was like low on book 5 ending rather than book 4 ending. See, so I can't even keep myself straight. You know?
I remember book 5 has its high points, but I did have some issues with it as well. I really start to have issues with the books, and this is much discussed, but like there's the infamous slog, or slog.
Yep. Yeah, that's
Saying
right.
it out loud now is weird.
Mhm. Yep.
Um, that I guess you are on the precipice of. I've
Yep.
heard from a lot of people reading the books now that they've been released that it is not an issue for them, because it was just particularly bad when you're waiting a couple of years between each release, and then you get a release and it's like, did this all happen in a day?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, where are we progressing? Um, Having reread them as well a few times, I do still struggle with that section of the series, but they do have their moments as well. But that really starts after book 6 generally.
I find the thing for me is I was kind of saying this before, but I feel like the prologue takes I could get through it, then I can start to get in the story. I feel like I try to set myself like a reading goal of how many pages, and by like halfway through, I'm going in and I'm like far surpassing my reading goal because I'm just like so invested. I feel like he's so good at like starting. I don't think he's as strong as starting the story, but I think he's really good at like mapping out the story so that everything sort of connects together in a way, which I think is probably why people feel that the finales are not living up to what I think the books do the best, which is
Yeah.
it all culminates to something that is amazing. And if you don't do that, then a lot of the like slow churn to get there feels like, well, what were we doing? That doesn't even make sense, you know?
I think
So
that's a great point,
yeah.
actually. That like I think the strong point of the books, and this is why Sanderson was such a good fit to finish them, is their climaxes. And for me at least, the climaxes were always the best points of Robert Jordan's writing, and the build up had its moments. I really, really do like book 1, and I think the climax to book 1 is actually its weakness. I think book 1 is the inverse of a lot
I
of this.
agree with that because, but it's still
Um,
like, the beginning of their hero's journey, right? Of like everything
right.
happening, Yeah.
But the show, I think, is the inverse, where like the show has done a really good job of building things up and building the characters, and has flopped a bit on the climaxes. And so I could definitely see why some people would take issue with that. But
Yep.
I think that's about what
2
we have
hours,
here
it's pretty good. I feel like that's pretty good for
for
the first
for
3
three very
episodes.
dense episodes of lore heavy television that we talked spoilers and non spoilers for.
Yeah.
I think we got through a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. Love it. Love chatting about it. It's a
All
fun show.
right. Yes. Well, as I said, we will be back next week to talk about episode 4. I'm excited about that because, trying to talk about 3 episodes at once,
Yeah, I know.
is a lot. We didn't touch a ton on like Lan and Nynaeve, and like there's still like plenty of stuff I'm sure to talk about, but we are already 2 hours in. So I'm excited to talk about a single episode next week. And in the meantime, you can check out the Tastemakers, where the two of us talk about all of the latest shows that are released, as well as movies occasionally. And what's like worth watching, what's worth checking out, what kind of news is going on in the world of TV and film. Very fun podcast, and it will keep you informed about all the things that you need to know in the world of entertainment. So tune into that. And we also got plenty of other stuff going on, I'm sure.
A lot of TV on right now, a lot of good TV. Yeah. So lots of coverage here on, you can check out us to know which ones you should be watching. And then if you want bonus coverage of it, then you can go check out all the people who are talking about it on We Know Scripted TV.
Yeah. Anything else to plug, Grace?
Just check, if you want, you can check out my interviews I did with some of the cast, Wheel of Time on parade.com. You and I are hoping we have our some feelers out to maybe do some bonus pods on the Wheel of Time. So no promises, but we'll see what we can deliver. It'd be very fun if what we have planned comes to fruition. So we'll just tease you with that, but that's it for me.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. If you've lasted all the way through this podcast, I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see all of you next time.